When was the last time you wrote a letter? Not a text or tweet or a direct message with an emoji. Not even a carefully crafted email. But an actual, honest-to-God letter. One that you set down with pen and paper. And as the words flowed, you told someone you love them. Or that you missed them. Or that you were sorry. If you're like a lot of people, perhaps it's been a while. But I'm here to tell you that needs to change. Because I believe that the simple act of handwriting a letter can fundamentally change who you are as a person, can impact the recipient in immeasurable ways, and if done often enough, can change who we are as a society. Now you may be asking yourself, how could the simple act of writing a letter do such a thing? And I have to say, I don't blame you. You see, I did not understand its impact either. That is, until October the 7th, 1997. That's the day my father, Robert Gray Davis, passed away. After years of illness that included a kidney transplant and the amputation of an arm and a leg to diabetes, he simply fell asleep and did not wake up. I still remember the shrieking phone call I got from my mother as my father lay motionless beside her. It was, and still is, the worst day of my life. But from that pain was born a legacy. You see, my father had a mission, and that mission was simple. He wanted to write letters. Letters to the people, places, and things in his life that mattered. So with the one hand he had left, he wrote 26 letters from the heart. But it wasn't just the simple act of writing that meant so much. It was the deep impact those letters had on their recipients, and in turn, the cathartic experience my father felt in writing them. 3 days after I got that phone call from my mother, I stood in a cemetery with my brothers, and I handed out some of those letters to their intended recipients. I still remember the look of peace and the look of love as they opened the envelope, read the words, and then saw my father's name. I want you to think for a moment about someone in your life, someone who's influenced you, perhaps touched you. Maybe it was a family member or a friend, a coach or a colleague, maybe even a complete stranger who performed an uncommon act of kindness. Think of that person. Hold their image in your mind. Imagine what it was about them that changed you. Now imagine putting those thoughts on paper. Or better yet, imagine this. It's a Friday afternoon. It's been a long week, maybe even a lonely week. And that person walks to the mailbox. And among the junk mail and the bills, they see an envelope. And on the upper left-hand corner, they see your name. You know, letter writing is an art form. It started with chiseled images on stone. It evolved to the great prose of our religious texts, to Shakespeare, to soldiers at war sending their thoughts home. And yet, in today's society, it seems as if we have devolved to those same chiseled images. Only today, they're on our smartphones. Isn't our mission as humans to evolve, not devolve? Communication is key to who we are, and yes, technology does allow for a great degree of efficiency in that communication. But it allows for very little intimacy. It is the intimacy of this communication that can change you. When you write on a piece of paper and your hand crosses the center point, you engage the left and the right sides of your brain. You're thinking critically and creatively. When you handwrite a letter, you slow down. You contemplate. You reflect. This doesn't happen on a typewriter. As a matter of fact, when we all took typing class in high school, or as keyboarding class as they call it now, what's the one thing you focused on? What's the one thing you were proud of and probably most graded on? How many words per minute can I type? It's not the quantity of our words that matter. It's the quality. You see, my father used his words to write 26 letters. 26 letters for their intended recipients. But my father's mission, while simple, was larger than that. You see, my father viewed those 26 letters as his memoir in letter form. He wanted to share them with the world. I'm happy to say that 20 years after his death, I did just that. By adding content and context around those letters, they are now a published work of nonfiction. A posthumous co-authoring with my father. And as I've talked about this project with people, I get interesting responses. Generally, the first thing someone says to me is, "Oh, letter writing. That's a dying art." Not entirely untrue, but I can tell you this, it is not dead. It's living and breathing, alive and well in some unlikely places. One group that reached out to me about the project was the New York City Letter Writers Society. They invited me to New York City to spend some time, and as I prepared for this trip, my friends and family said to me, "Well, what is the New York City Letter Writers Society?" And I have to admit, I had no idea. It very well could have been 3 crazy old women in the basement of a Greenwich Village apartment. I had visions of a dark staircase leading to a dusty library full of envelopes and encyclopedias. But when I got down to Lower Manhattan, what I found was an eclectic, diverse group of 20 and 30-somethings. There was the curator from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the pencil shop owner in Soho, the young graphic artist working at a co-working space in Midtown, and it was all led by Rhea Abramson, an executive in the fashion industry. And for the next 3 hours, we sat around a table full of stationery and envelopes and postcards and postage stamps, and we laughed. We told stories. And we wrote letters. We wrote letters to the people in our lives that mattered. And as I sat there with this group, overlooking the Hudson River, as the sun set beyond the Statue of Liberty, I thought, here is the most connected generation in the history of mankind. And yet they feel more disconnected than ever. And they're using the art of letter writing to reconnect. And they're turning the art of letter writing into a work of art with ink stamps, drawings, calligraphy, all on the envelope. So that when you open the mailbox, you have a gift in and of itself before you ever read the first word. The other thing that I found interesting is that everyone has a letter writing story. Everybody. Think about it in your life. There was a time in your life, maybe it was your first week of college, maybe that week at summer camp or your first job or when you got married, someone sent you a letter. Someone gave you a handwritten note. It meant something. People say to me all the time, they tell me stories. The young lady said, my grandfather wrote to my grandmother every week when he was in the war. I have all of these letters. They're in a box at my home. I've always wanted to do something with them. Or the young man that told me, when I was a child, my father traveled for business every week. But regardless of where he went, he sent me a postcard or a note on hotel stationery. I still have those. Some of them are framed on the wall in my office. I think of my father often when I see these, and I ask them a question. I say, do you write letters? Do you send notes to your child? Inevitably, after a quick glance at the floor, they say no. And I say, why? If you understand the power of this process, would you not do that? They tell me this. They say, I don't have time. I just can't find the time. Time is an interesting concept. You see, if you don't find time, time will find you. Time found my father, and he used his time to write 26 letters that shaped his life and changed mine. And I thought, that's my letter writing story. And then one day, somebody asked me about the project, specifically about my family, my mother. They wanted a picture of my mother on her wedding day. And I knew I had this picture, I just didn't know where. So one day I go down into my basement, to my unfinished basement where we keep all the stuff that we've accumulated over time. And there in the corner are the 20 boxes that my wife told me 5 years ago I should have gone through. And so I get down there and I start looking through the boxes, and there's the box of pictures. And there's the picture of my mother on her wedding day. Young, vibrant, beautiful. I pull the picture out and I set it on the floor. And as I glance back into that box, I see an envelope. Large, manila envelope, tattered and torn, had some age on it. And as I pull it out, I see two words: Ashley's graduation. Now, I must say, at this point in the story, I'm not excited about that large manila envelope. You see, the mid-'80s was not the best fashion period in my life. This was a box of pictures. Pictures were not at the top of my list. But what I found when I opened that envelope was every card, every letter, every note I received when I graduated high school 30 years ago. Now, most of these were simply Hallmark cards from a third cousin in Mississippi who sent me $10 because I was Bobby Davis's son and I graduated high school. But at the bottom of that envelope was a business-sized letter, handwritten, addressed to Mr. William Van Ashley Davis, postmarked May 19th, 1986. It was from my grandfather, Mr. Van Davis, whom I affectionately refer to as Peanut. In this letter, my grandfather told me what he thought of me as a child, what he hoped for me as a man. He told me about the collegiate experience on which I was about to embark, how to pick my friends, and how to put myself in the right situations. And as I tell you this story now, I have chills. And as I read that letter for the first time in 30 years, sitting on the floor of my unfinished basement, I cried. I wept, thinking of a man, my grandfather, that I've not seen in 25 years, who I've now been reintroduced to because my father decided to write a series of letters before he died 20 years ago. That's the power of a handwritten letter. That's the emotion that can transcend generations and last for decades. That's why I'm so passionate about letter writing. That's why I invite you to join me on this letter writing journey, so that you too can understand that power, so that you too can feel that emotion, so that you too, perhaps, in 15 years, 20, perhaps 30 years from now, you will sit on the floor of your unfinished basement and you will weep. So the question that I will leave you with today is a very simple one. To whom will you write? Thank you.